Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal News Hour. So excited to be with you tonight. Um, that's me feigning excitement because I'm dead tired. I had a very restful weekend, but honestly, today I kind of gave up. My skin is not in a good place. I didn't even put makeup on because, as you can see, I've got all kinds of issues happening. And as much as I would love to cover it all up so that no one sees anything, um, I also know that sometimes the best thing you can do for your skin is just let it breathe without a ton of makeup and all this type of thing. So I will be working on that later, which will be fun. Um, and trying to just get pores unclogged and things moving and everything. I did my big on Sundays I do a big spa evening where I do my skin and my hair and blah 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 blah, and I did all that last night. I was hoping it would heal a lot of things, and instead it just brought everything out. So um that was fun. But we have a lovely trio of stories this evening. Um there's been a lot of talk um, about Trump trying to run for vice president and then someone stepping down in 2028, which has been interesting because of a remark he said on a plane, and that's caused a lot of hubbub. But honestly, there's some more interesting things going on, actually, surprisingly enough, that I think are also incredibly valuable. We're probably going to talk about it on the Living Joke as well, so I don't want to mac on my other show too much. But Russia did test a fancy new missile that we'll get to this evening as well. We're also going to talk about Trump's um, Asia trip and what that all means. There's even a little bit of video we're gonna watch with all that. We're also gonna talk about the new plan rumor to deploy National Guard response force. I talked about the federal government seizing elections on the newsletter on Saturday. So speaking of the newsletter, if you haven't signed up, please go to cameronjournal.com/newsletter and sign up for the newsletter. It comes out every Saturday, and it has really great stories, the latest stuff from me. And if you can't keep track of the interviews from the podcast or the news hour or the living joke, it's all emailed to you every Saturday. So make sure and go sign up for that. It's a lot of fun, and it gives you some great headlines and little updates from me. And I just want to get to know y'all better. And the newsletter is the best way to do that on a mass scale. So that's really good. That's a lot of fun. But I did cover that on the newsletter, so we might get into that a little bit. I also want to talk about Stephen Miller threatening to arrest governors, state officials, and local officials who stop ICE from doing their jobs, which is, I think it's one of those things that on the surface sounds like a good idea, but is not necessarily the best idea, for a variety of reasons. But tonight's leading story is an interesting one, and that is kind of all the people that are turning away from MAGA, kind of starting with uh starting with the podcast bros. So we've talked about the fact we ran the clip last week with Joe Rogan, where he was talking about how the mass deportations and all this type of thing seemed really extreme, and no one anticipated that or thought that was going to be a thing, but then now it's a thing, and it's just kind of like, oh, sort of thing. Well, we have a new report from Atrioc, Let me switch the screen here. So we have a new report. Oh, I'm still set for the living joke. Let me, whoop, there we go. So I found this tweet and I saved it away. Gen Z males are turning away from Donald Trump, but are not aligning with the Democratic Party either, expressing frustration with both sides per Atrioc. So I will admit I didn't go crazy to find what the hell Atrioc was, but it's some sort of source. However, I don't necessarily want to get into this for the sake of whatever polling they did that probably comprised 200 people, all this type of thing. I think it's an interesting. I talk about the Democratic Party brand, and I talk with a lot of friends and whatnot, and even the guys on the living joke, where I talk about, you know, the Democratic Party and the, in fact, I was having this conversation today, the Democratic Party brand is extremely toxic. And that is for several reasons. But the biggest one is that the Democratic Party over the last decade has been very focused on decentering men. It has been very focused on centering minorities and women to the detriment of men, but particularly white men. And the Democratic Party, for better or for worse, has gotten, as part of its brand and part of its story, has been linked to some of the most absolutely crazy people on the far extreme left, in a way that the GOP never gets linked to the far right in the same way. And so it's not surprising, I mean, given what's going on and given what's happening, it's not surprising that some Gen Z dudes may be turning away from Trump and MAGA and all this type of thing. I mean, let's look around. It's been 9 months. What do they have to show for their votes last year? Not much. 58% of last year's graduating class can't find a job. And that loops back around to some stuff about 2008, America's Lost Generation. We'll come back to that. But it is not a surprise there. And I understand why they're not necessarily fleeing to the Democratic Party either, because that's already problematic. And one of the things that I think we didn't think about in the Democratic Party and didn't think about in the progressive movement over the last 10 years is, in all the messaging and in all the crazy things that were said, crazy things that were posted, you know, the end of rape culture, the Me Too movement, all this type of thing, is what type of messaging young people with very little experience and no context were hearing when those things were said. And what a lot of young men heard was, you are the problem, you're an oppressive to other people, your voice is not important because you're a man and you're white, and or both of those things. They also heard that, you know, they, you know, we're kind of responsible for all of these things. Now, I'm not saying that white people do not benefit from a culture in a system of whiteness. They certainly do. And it's everywhere. You know, it's so common we don't even notice it. It's like air. However, I think the message to young people without the context and everything was that, you know, you're the problem, you're the issue, all this type of thing. And then on top of that, we have this, you know, dating and sex culture that is, oh, you know, don't talk to girls, don't be a creep, don't be this, don't be that. Not understanding that didn't mean don't talk to women at all, you know, sort of thing. And it just meant, you know, do it a different way than it had been done in the past. But they didn't know what the past was. And a lot of young people, they're doing their first time. They're maybe just trying to talk to a girl they're interested in the first time. They're just, you know, trying some things out, and they're gonna make mistakes. And you're gonna make mistakes. I made mistakes. Every dude I know made mistakes. You know, you get the fumbles, all this type of thing. For Gen Z men, not only has that come with the shame of social media that those of us who did all that before social media never had, but then there's also the possibility of legal and career implications that have been extremely damaging. And so it definitely, let's put it this way, the Democratic Party didn't do itself any favors with young men. And I was in the mix of this conversation. I was writing for the Good Men Project. I found the Paul Elam interview that's not on YouTube. I found the audio file for it. I will edit that this week and get it up. Um and all this, all of this stuff that was happening, I was in this whole conversation, and I don't think any of us realized at the time that that whole thing, that whole progressive movement from, 2008 to 2022, for young people whose childhoods and early high school and even college experiences were happening, all that made the Democratic Party seem a bunch of full of shrill women, loser simps, male feminists who turned out to be abusive, and we were just absolutely appalling. The brand is toxic. And the Democratic Party has never done anything to stop that, mitigate that, or distance itself from it either. In many cases, it's ran headlong into it. And I have this video saved on TikTok, we should watch at some point, where he says that the problem with the Democratic Party is not brand. Stop calling branding people to fix the brand of the Democratic Party. The problem is more fundamental than that. And that's kind of where I kind of disagree. I think the Democratic Party has excellent policies and an excellent view and vision for the country. Here's the problem. It never gets articulated. The Biden administration messaging was so poor. It never gets articulated until it comes around to an election time. And most importantly, I think it is... The policies are right. It's the online conversation and narrative that's wrong. And the DNC has never done anything to fix that, to attack that, or counter that. The online view of the Democratic Party is that they're losers. And just they lose, they're miserable. If you're a dude and you're a Democrat, you are just some kind of lousy loser. And even look at like what happened to Henry Sisson. He's a young man of age talking to other women who are of age, and everyone was losing their hair because a young man was hitting on women. The sky is blue. The earth is brown. Like, if you've met a 22-year-old not gay male, then he's gonna be talking and hitting on girls. Everyone was of age, so what exactly is the problem? But that's the problem in today's Democratic Party, is a young healthy man expressing himself in a young healthy man kind of way gets pilloried for nothing. So what am I trying to say here? It's this. This is an opportunity. The Democratic Party is probably not going to seize it, although I could tell them how they could do it. They're not going to seize it, but this is an opportunity. If this is true, and it's probably not quite the panacea this tweet is saying it is, but this could be a great opportunity to recapture men for the Democratic Party by showing them what the future could be that isn't make Trump and his cronies rich, that doesn't keep Trump in power forever, that lets them have agency and actively seize control of society and make it much better for themselves, for their family, and give them hope for the future. Everything Kamala Harris said about hope and joy and the future is right exactly where we need to be. That's what these men need right now. But they need it coming from the right people. They need it coming with the right message. And they need it to be real. And it needs to be a message that everyone in the party says over and over on repeat all the time forever. That's how you message in today's media environment. It's not just enough to have a press conference or put out a video. No, you need every single podcaster, person, progressive video, everybody needs to be squawking the same tune so it becomes monolithic. That's how you have to message in a balkanized media environment. And this is an opportunity to do that and do it well. Do I think the party is going to seize the moment? Probably not, but this is certainly an opportunity to do so. I love some of the comments here. It says here, our politicians are in bed with corporations and lobbyists, APAC and Indian groups. The U.S. job market is terrible. No wonder they can't get jobs, and the Trump admin is ignoring them and gaslighting about how great the economy is. Trump deserves to lose midterms. No one voted for him to put all the rest of the world first. Um, Young Americans voted for American first, which means American jobs should go to Americans. Meanwhile, Trump is still allowing foreigners to replace American workers and allowing millions of jobs to be offshored to India. That's why young voters are mad. Promises not kept. Um, and uh, and it says if this is happening, it's because the anti-Semite Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens wing, combined with the stupid trolling that Trump's admin does on social media. My Gen Z son has strong conservative values and will generally vote right, but he's been pretty disgusted with the juvenile behavior of the administration. Um, Twitch streamer Atriok is a source for claims about Gen Z males' political shifts away from Trump. Highlight, oh, that's just a bot saying who Atriok is. So it's a Twitch streamer. Um, it's um yeah, it goes on and on. Gen Z males are not Ziocucks, don't like being racially replaced in their own homeland in a poor left-wing politics culture. Who knew? Um, I wouldn't, I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't necessarily say that young men are rejecting all of the left-wing culture and all this type of thing. You'd be surprised how many, when you kind of dig under the surface, how many young people do have progressive social values and progressive views. I think what a lot of young men do not want is they don't want to feel like they're demonized for their race, for their gender, or wanting to have a wife, have a girlfriend, have relationships with women, all this type of thing. I think they don't want to feel like they're somehow a loser. I think the Democratic Party needs to be a party of winners again. It needs to be a party that is, creating hope for the future and putting in policies that get hope for the future. We have a lot of headwinds coming our way, and we need to put in policies that serve people, not just the wealthy. Incidentally, that's a big part of the Democratic Party brand. Does it get messaged properly? No, because it mostly comes from Bernie. AOC might help, but that's the type of thing that we have to get the whole party squawking on. Does this mean more economic populism? Absolutely. Does this mean fewer minority issues and identity politics? Absolutely. What have I said? In 2026, all the minorities are getting thrown overboard in the Democratic Party. Why? Because they've got to get back to the center and they've got to get white people voting Democrat again. So all the minorities are overboard. Brown is out, white is in. That's what 2026 and 2028 is going to look like for the Democratic Party. And this is an opportunity to start that turnaround. If you can get that turnaround going in time for the midterms, you can really screw over Trump by getting Democrats in districts where they thought they gerrymandered them out and all this type of thing. But you've got to change the messaging, and you've got to stop that. You cannot get the median voter back on fringe issues. So you can't make a trans issue the center of what you're being known for. You've got to message in a different way, and you've got to message it all the time, constantly, nonstop, all the time. And that the problem is no one really knows what to think about the Democratic Party, so all they hear is what the right wing gives them. And the right wing framing of the Democratic Party, this has been going on for decades, but the right wing framing of the Democratic Party makes it easy to pick out a clip here, someone saying there, a movement there, and say, oh, look, all the Democrats are here wanting this sort of thing. And that's where this has come from. That's why the brand is toxic. Now, the Democratic Party doesn't necessarily help itself in a lot of ways, and a lot of things that are done and said, like what they did to David Hogg, is certainly not helpful. But the unfortunate reality is that if you do not define yourself in the marketplace, it will be defined for you. The Democratic Party has not defined itself in the marketplace. It has always been defined by someone else, by something else. If you want to make this real and get this turnaround going, you have to be known for something. You have to stand for something. Trump, as problematic as it is, he stands for something. That's why Make America Great Again is the perfect political slogan. It means whatever it needs to mean to whoever's hearing it. It is the perfect political slogan. And he has defined himself on a narrow set of issues. He has defined himself on a wide variety of different things that can all fall into a few umbrellas, so people can immediately know how they feel about him. That's what the Democratic Party has to do. But that means that the progressive left is going to have to be quiet about their pet niche issue that does not matter to anyone in Iowa. And that the Democratic Party has gotten into all these small 90-10 things that get us absolutely nowhere. Now, I think in time, a lot of that stuff can come along. You can bring a lot of those things along. But right now, today, you have to keep it large and big tent. Anyway, enough on that. Enough on this possibility. It's an interesting idea. Turning, speaking of immigration issues, we now have, from one of the most racist accounts on Twitter, we have the clip from Stephen Miller. Before I read the tweet, let's just listen to the video, shall we? Let's
talk about your willingness and under what federal authority do you arrest a sitting governor? I understand the supremacy clause. I understand interference with a federal officer. Tell me how it works that he would make himself susceptible to being arrested.
Well, the answer I'm about to give doesn't only apply to Governor Pritzker. It applies to any state official, any local official, anybody who's operating in an official capacity who conspires or engages in activity that unlawfully impedes federal law enforcement conducting their duties. So if you engage in a criminal conspiracy to obstruct the enforcement of federal immigration laws, or to unlawfully order your own police officers or your own officials to try to interfere with ICE officers or even to arrest ICE officers, you're engaged in criminal activity. Different kinds of crimes would apply. There's obstruction of justice. There is harboring illegal aliens. There is impeding the enforcement of our immigration laws. And then as you get up the scale of behavior, you obviously get into seditious conspiracy charges, depending on the conduct, and many other offenses. So again, it depends on the action, it depends on the conduct, it depends on what is taking place. But what we need to reassure, a couple points. To all ICE officers, you have federal immunity in the conduct of your duties. And anybody who lays a hand on you or tries to stop you or tries to obstruct you is committing a felony. You have immunity to perform your duties, and no one, no city official, no state official, no illegal alien, no leftist agitator or domestic insurrectionist can prevent you from fulfilling your legal obligations and duties. And the Department of Justice has made clear that if officials cross that line into obstruction, into criminal conspiracy against the United States or against ICE officers, then they will face justice.
Well, it says here that Stephen Miller says that the Trump administration will arrest governors, state officials, and local officials, and anyone else operating in an official capacity who impedes federal law enforcement from doing their jobs. And then it quotes him. It says, and the DOJ has made clear that if officials cross that line into obstruction of a criminal conspiracy against the United States or against ICE officers, then they will face justice. And the first post is indicative of how half the country feels on this issue. So many guilty Democrats to arrest, where to start. And it says here, this is simply not true. It sounds good, but all of you recognize the gaslighting, correct? No. I hope by now when we hear people like Stephen Miller or Cash Patel or Pam Bondi or Tom Homan talk about dropping the hammer of justice, everyone's reaction is to laugh. And if not, what's wrong with you? Maybe a little bit more fact-checking and a little bit less posting FAFO memes. So it's,
Let's talk about
the idea, you know, is that there's a lot of states, especially blue states, that are resisting the current ICE immigration raids and overreach and, quite frankly, authoritarian moves, and states are trying to decide how they're going to put a stop to it or severely curtail it. And the message on this is quite clear. We're coming to your city. We're going to arrest whoever we want. We're going to clear out as many people, not even immigrants, people, as we do or do not want to. and the local officials cannot do anything, otherwise they're committing federal crimes. This message is, I think, to do two things. One, to reassure MAGA voters who wanted this, and two, to scare the living daylights out of out of blue state governors. Now, as some people point out in the comment section, Stephen Miller is an advisor. He has no authority to do anything. And I think this is also I think, supposed to pacify protesters, convince people that there's no point in protesting, there's no point in trying to stop this. It's to calm down the hubbub. Because here's the problem with the current immigration situation. It's getting too loud. People are noticing it too much. There's too many people protesting about it. It's going too far. And again, what did I say at the top of the show? He's already losing Theo Vaughn and Rogan and the whole podcast bro crew. They're trying to say, no, this is going to happen, and the federal government is going to come in, and we're going to enforce federal law no matter what. And notice that Stephen Miller is never appearing on other channels with this. He's only appearing on Fox News saying this stuff. And this stuff usually gets reposted by accounts like this that, you know, these people are ready to put on an SS uniform and start goose-stepping in the street. I mean, he has a Punisher flag, PFP, come on. This is sad. That's sad. Also, the Punisher was anti-cop, but whatever. Like, that was his whole thing, you know. And that also kind of gets into that whole idea, kind of looping back to the story before, that a lot of people feel like the Democratic Party pushed too far and too fast on too many things, trying to remake society in a new image, and people just were not ready to go there yet, or felt like it had gone too much, too far. And that has emboldened people like Stephen Miller, who in another time and place would be marginalized, into, one, having a job at the White House, and two, squawking about arresting state officials on national television. Lincoln didn't do that during the Civil War, and we were shooting at each other. This could get very dangerous very quickly. Very, very quickly. And that should be concerning to all of us. I mean, you know, arresting a sitting governor would certainly be interesting. Not quite sure how they're going to do that, but would certainly be interesting. I'm not quite sure how they plan on pulling that off, but I'm about to answer my own question here, I think, with the next story. Oh, yes, here we are. So, the new, and I talked about this in the newsletter on Saturday.
A memo circulating on social media details the establishment of a National Guard response force that's going to be trained in crowd...
This is the problem with X. Things only kind of work sometimes. It loops back into this next story, which is the rumors of a memo circulating about a National Guard response force that's going to be trained in crowd control and civil unrest and will be deployed in all 50 states by April of 2026. By the way, there's very little federal authority for that. Just, you know, we haven't had federal troops in states since Reconstruction. In an occupational capacity. This is definitely going in that direction. The federal government usually, for its authority, not its authority, but its ability to execute actions, relies heavily on state and local officials and state and local police departments for logistics, all this type of thing. If states start pulling back from that for whatever reason, then it gets a lot more difficult to do things, and it becomes a lot more tenuous to act on those things. Trump is right now, without the consent of governors, calling up the National Guard in order to do this, and it seems like that's where this is going as well. But let's watch the clip now.
Sir, a memo circulating on social media details the establishment of a National Guard response force that's going to be trained in crowd control and civil unrest and deployed in all 50 states by April of 2026. Can you verify the authenticity of that memo, and do you have any more information on the operations?
I'm not going to answer particulars on something that may be in the planning process, but we definitely do have multiple layers of National Guard response forces, whether it's in each state, whether it's regionally, whether it's Title 10 active duty, whether it's Washington, D.C. We've got a lot of different ways that constitutionally and legally we can employ Title 10 and Title 32 forces, and we will do so when necessary.
Question for Secretary Hegseth.
It's and the idea that this person is cackling about is that, you know, when things get weird because of the election or whatever have you, then the federal government will step in and stop those evil blue states and those evil Democrats from doing all the evil things that we always know that they're evilly doing in their lair of evil. Evil. It's like, and this reminds me when I first got introduced to QAnon. It was from someone who was working for me at the time at another publication. And he sent me to one of the websites where a lot of this stuff was. And I was looking through the list of politicians and whatnot that they said were, you know, evil, awful, pedophiles, all this type of thing. And I scrolled through this list, and he and I got back together at one point, and I said, "Did you know something about the list of politicians?" And he said, he's like, "No, what'd you notice?" I'm like, "They're all Democrats. Every single one. There's not one Republican on your QAnon list. You really think that somehow a crime and conspiracy this deep somehow respects political lines and boundaries? Especially with some Republicans that have been there for decades, like Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell, and hell, we've already had some Republicans prosecuted for, you know, or had to settle out of court for, you know, different crimes and all this type of thing. Like, what, you know, you really think that that this follows party lines?" And he's like, "Well, you know, I guess, like, yeah, I mean, it's all, like, their fault. Like, they're the deep state, right?" I'm like, "No, this is divisive political schlocky crap." And you'll notice we haven't heard one word about QAnon in, like, years. Not one word. That whole thing came and went without, you know, anyone really saying anything. You never hear about those people anymore. It's all off social media. It's all gone. I kind of want to know what that is. It's all gone, you know, it's all gone away. And that, I think, is quite interesting. Don't you think? I've always thought so. Oh, that's because the government shut down. Speaking of the shutdown, actually, let's go back to this. Speaking of the shutdown, I have not really covered the shutdown, and I wrote something in the newsletter on Saturday where I kind of finally covered the shutdown and explained what was going on, what was happening, and why all this was, you know, here, and how we got into this place, and what the issue was about Affordable Care Act subsidies, Obamacare subsidies, and all this sort of thing. And I think it is an interesting situation, especially if there's not an unfreeze of the funding. On Friday, food stamps are not going out this Friday, you know, to people on the first of the month when they would ordinarily get their food stamp benefits. Today, X has been absolutely filled with people talking about, "Oh my God, 40 million Americans are on food stamps. That's 1 in 8 people. Why am I working for people who can't feed themselves?" And all this type of thing. And it's, yeah. So the USDA has chosen not to, use emergency funds, and has chosen not to use those emergency funds to release the funding to make food stamps possible. In fact, and I just forgot, I have a story about that. that's out of order from Aaron Parnas, who I've recently, I guess, discovered, one could say, although I've known who he was. And it says here that the Trump administration, and this is, again, why the Democrats have bad messaging. The Trump administration violated the Hatch Act when the USDA used its official government website to post partisan attacks blaming Senate Democrats for a potential SNAP funding lapse, accusing them of supporting health care for illegal aliens instead of reopening the government. This is what the website currently looks like. Notice, Senate Democrats have now voted 12 times to not fund the food stamp program, also known as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. Bottom line, the well has run dry. At this time, there will be no benefits issued November 1st. We are approaching an inflection point for Senate Democrats. They can continue to hold out for health care for illegal aliens and gender mutilation procedures, or reopen the government so mothers, babies, and the most vulnerable among us can receive critical nutrition assistance. What they really mean is that they want to get rid of the Affordable Care Act subsidies and a whole bunch of things the government does not want to have to pay for, and they're basically trying to hold people's food hostage to get Senate Democrats to break. And I was writing a little bit about this on the newsletter, which is why you need to subscribe, CameronJournal.com/newsletter. Was writing about this, and I think, politically speaking, this has been very wise about the Affordable Care Act subsidies. However, 40 million people not getting food benefits, that will turn into absolute civil chaos almost immediately. The pandemic will seem like a picnic. And it's Monday. This can be our reality this weekend. Oh, and did I mention Halloween falls on a Friday this year? So, yeah, Halloween falls on a Friday, and then November 1st, you have 40 million Americans who will not have access to food. This will backfire on the Democratic Party in ways I can't even begin to contemplate. It also would give President Trump a reason to declare martial law and suspend all rights and basically, start his own version of a military tribunal government. Right now, negotiations are not even occurring. The only thing Trump wants to hear from Democrats is, we're going to vote for your bill and we're going to do all the cuts that you want. He's waiting for the Democratic Party to roll over. And I would dare say letting SNAP go out on November 1st is definitely probably not going to go well for them politically. They're between a rock and a hard spot. This has been a valiant stand on their part. Everyone's been waiting on them to do something. They've done something. Unfortunately, it's probably the wrong place and the wrong time. However, I will say, as a sort of sidebar, this sort of Trump violated the Hatch Act. No! No, no, no. That is not the damn headline. Half the messaging about Trump from the Democratic Party always has been, oh, this norm, oh, this law, oh, this violation, and I'm not saying those things aren't important. They are. That is not the headline. The headline is holding food hostage for his own political ends. Not a violation of a law nobody's heard of and nobody cares about using government websites for partisan attacks. No, 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 no. The messaging, you could flip this whole thing around on his head. Trump wants to cut off your food stamps by not negotiating with Democrats over health care. They're doing it. Look at how this is framed. Listen to how this is framed. And then I'll give you the reverse version. Senate Democrats have now voted 12 times to not fund the food stamp program, also known as SNAP. Bottom line, the well has run dry. At this time, there will be no benefits issued November 1st. We're approaching an inflection point for Senate Democrats. They can continue to hold out for health care for illegal aliens and gender mutilations procedures, or reopen the government so mothers, babies, and the most vulnerable among us can receive critical nutrition assistance. Let's do the reverse of that. Here's what Democrats should be saying. President Trump is continuing to not fund SNAP by causing your healthcare prices to increase exponentially by not allowing us to continue subsidies for healthcare that keeps costs affordable for Americans. He is instead choosing mothers, babies, and others to starve in order to cut back on subsidies so that you pay more for healthcare. That's what the message should be. And every Democrat should be on every podcast, every television show, got every street corner saying that over and over and over and over again, and saying we would be more than happy to come to the table, but you're not screwing working Americans over on their health care to do it. And you're not going to starve people either. You're not going to screw... And I would use his own language, like, you talk about America first, but you want our healthcare premiums to go up. You talk about America first, but you want people starving in the street. You talk about America first, but you're not doing anything on trade that's not hurting American farmers. You want all these things for this country, but everything you do tells us you don't actually want that because you're enriching yourself and your friends and your donors. That's the message. Stop talking about the damn Hatch Act. Nobody gives a shit. They give a shit about themselves. They give a shit about their country and what's happening in their communities. And that has to be the message over and over and over and over again on every channel, every social media app, every single elected Democrat, from governors to dog catchers, need to be repeating that over and over and over and over again. It's Trump, get your hands off my healthcare. Trump, get your hands off my SNAP. It's Trump, get your hands off this stuff. What they post to a website does not matter. The fact that they violated the Hatch Act does not matter. What matters is getting people directionally on your side and putting the blame. That's how politics is supposed to work. Is it, necessarily so good, so great, all this type of thing? No, that's politics. It's a dirty, nasty business. That's why a lot of people didn't used to want to do it and still don't. It's a dirty, nasty business with a lot of mudslinging going on. Trump is perfect at doing it, and the Democrats have had a decade to figure it out, and they still can't do it. And every time opportunities come along for them to do stuff, and they fall flat on their face every single time. Every single time. It's stupid. Anyway. Let's get into China and manufacturing and trade. Speaking of trade, because we have a couple stories on this. Let's go. We have a clip.
You just look at the way that the Trump administration has conducted its trade negotiations with China. It was premised on the notion that China's economy was so weak that you hit them with tariffs and they will immediately capitulate. And that was a ridiculous idea. And it's taken them a couple of rounds to figure out, oh, maybe that wasn't quite so right, and we have to take this more seriously. If you look at the trend of U.S. manufacturing employment as a share of total employment, it is a straight line from 1946 to today that looks like this. You cannot find the Cold War, you cannot find the rise of Japan, you cannot find NAFTA, you cannot find China, you cannot find anything. What you find, basically, I think, is the march of technological progress. And so all of these stories about China did this or China did that, yeah, there was some impact, but mainly what the United States failed to do is we failed to change our systems of redistribution, of helping people out. We failed in the social contract domestically. A lot of the things in the U.S. political context that are blamed on the rise of China are predominantly exercises in scapegoating. A lot of this notion that we will not have an auto industry in 5 years because of BYD, let's get a grip, folks. We could end up there, but if we end up there, it's because we will have made a bunch of really bad policy decisions that got us there, not because this competitive threat exists. You just look.
The reason I saved this clip is because, narratively speaking, it's so interesting about the decline in manufacturing, the increase of technology, the automation, how things are competing in the world, how, I think China's been a lot more resilient than anyone, especially the Trump administration, certainly anticipated. And I thought it was interesting to look at this. And he brought up a lot of great points about you can't find the Cold War or the rise of Japan or China or NAFTA or anything like that. It was just a kind of a straight, steady decline. If you look at a graph with services, it goes the other direction exponentially. And so I thought it was an interesting idea that, the way and approach in our thinking about China's been very difficult. I think the problem with this is it seemed like we woke up one day and everything was made in China. Everything made in China, made in China, made in China, made in China. And now it seems to have gotten even more crazy and more sophisticated. And China's policy has been to become the world's workshop and to become the place where stuff gets made. And now they're getting into very sophisticated stuff. They've had expertise and engineering and all this, so they're getting into very sophisticated stuff now. And so we're now looking at, how do we compete with this? And the problem is American labor is very expensive. So it doesn't make sense to manufacture a lot of stuff here. The places where we have had growth, where we have had excelled, are in services technology, those head intellectual jobs. The problem is we don't have comparable jobs for people who can't go into that. If you can't go into tech or something intellectual that requires education, your next best options are trade, which still requires some training, or relatively low paying, low value service jobs. That's the problem. Is in the past, someone could bang a hammer on a Ford and get paid well to do it and do very well for themselves. You can't do that working fast food. You can't do that working in restaurants. You can't do that in, personal services, aid, healthcare, whatever have you. The problem is the jobs we're creating for a few that have the right education pay fabulously well. For everyone else, it's a slog and a struggle. I think China is easy to blame because it's a foreign power, it's exotic, and it seems like now everything's made in China, sort of thing. And don't count out the deindustrialization thing. Watching factories and smelters and mines and things close up and companies go under and good, decent paying jobs go away has absolutely gutted the heart of this country. And the new jobs and new technology, new opportunities have been concentrated in a dozen superstar cities. I've been writing about this for years and years. But I thought this was interesting because he's kind of saying, let's not blame China, let's blame our policy decisions and that we haven't shifted around our social safety net to compensate for these economic changes. And that is entirely correct, and I would very much support making some changes on that. And I think his outlook is China's not going to take it all, and if we change our policies, that doesn't have to be the outcome here. There is something exciting that can and should happen, but we can't just blame China for everything. Now, bearing that in mind, I found this bit of propaganda. But again, this is the News Narrative Show, News Narratives. So, this whole big long post is about China, about Trump's trip to China and signing a new deal at APAC. And it says here, because Trump's been on progress, so it says here that Trump threatened to destroy $300 billion in Chinese exports with 100% tariffs. Beijing responded by threatening to choke the global technology supply chain. Then something impossible happened, the 72-hour checkmate. October 24th, Malaysia signs Mineral Pact. October 25th, Thailand signs processing deal. October 26th, framework announced China blinks. Hidden in the fine print, 13 billion Australian rare earth processing. Cambodia extraction rights, Japan's 2010 playbook, which cut Chinese dependency 30%, now deployed across $350 billion in American AI infrastructure. The number that ends globalization. U.S.-China trade in 2018, $758 billion. In 2024, $578 billion. That $100 billion didn't vanish. It relocated to nations that bend the knee. ASEAN trade up 20%. Chinese rare earth market share dropping for first time in 30 years. American supply chains rerouting in real time while Beijing realizes the trap. Here's what they're not telling you. This isn't trade negotiation, it's tribute collection. Trump just converted the world's largest consumer market from a trade partner into a weapon. Every nation now faces a choice: access to American markets or access to Chinese supply chains. Not both, ever again. The $20 billion soybean freeze, first since 2018, isn't retaliation, it's a demonstration. China can inflict pain. America can inflict extinction. And it goes on and shows that what happens next November 1st, Xi meets Trump at APEC. The deal is already done. Rare earth access for tariff relief. American boots on Asian rare earth facilities. China gets a safe face. America gets the future. Taiwan, AI dominance, technological independence, and the end of competitive multipolarity, all bundled into a trade framework the media will call a truce. The truth, globalization didn't collapse, it was conquered. Okay, so that's not... Some of this stuff is true. A lot of this is propaganda. Let's remember that. Narratively speaking, it's interesting. I think this top comment, I think, summarizes the actual situation very well. America didn't end globalization, it privatized it. The empire model is now subscription-based. Pay with loyalty or lose access. The question isn't who wins, but who escapes the system first. And that is an interesting idea, and this person says the thing I thought as well. This post is propaganda dressed up as analysis. Nothing in these trade pacts conquered globalization or made America an empire. What actually happened is 47 forced short-term deals with weak nations desperate for U.S. access while ignoring the long-term costs. Malaysia, Thailand, and Cambodia didn't replace China. They signed vague memorandums so 47 could claim a win before APEC. True. There's still no, building the facilities and all this type of thing will take years. China still controls the majority of rare earth processing, magnet production, and export capacity. Nothing changed overnight. The 72-hour checkmate is fiction meant to turn a photo op into a geopolitical myth. If anything, this shows how easily staged numbers and dramatic language can manipulate the public. America didn't outsource China, it just overpaid for headlines. The empire here isn't new. It's the same corporate machine using tariffs and fear to control markets while pretending it's a strategy. And that's 110% the situation. China is well positioned. Let's just step back from this for a moment. China is extremely well positioned. They have very critical manufacturing on very critical things that everybody needs. EVs, smartphones, everything. They've got it, and they can afford to lose money at it, because they're essentially planned economy in a way that market-based economies can't. They can afford to lose money on it. They can afford to build the fanciest, nicest facilities in God-forsaken nowhere and build all the roads, all the infrastructure, all the stuff to get there, because they don't necessarily have to turn it into money right this moment, if that makes sense. And so this is all, happening, and Trump is trying to diversify the supply chains, I think, is a way to get China to come to the table. I think the problem is the gamble is too big, because the reality is nothing that he's doing now will be in place till the end of this decade. And that even goes along with the whole reintroduction of industrialization into this country. Talk about, we're gonna, build this in American jobs. Yeah, in 5 years. In 10 years. And terrible inflation in the meantime as we spend all that money doing all that, by the way. Deindustrialization was somewhat deflationary, because it reduced demand. Anyway, this is all future set, but the people saying, yeah, this is all going to be for headlines. Yeah, it's overpaid for headlines. It is interesting to kind of go through some of the other kind of things here. That supply chains are voting with their feet. China plus one turned into China plus many. Vietnam, India, Mexico, and ASEAN pulled record FDI while U.S. tariffs and tech bans stayed. Globalization didn't collapse. It rerouted through members-only corridors. I will say the thing about this is probably true, is that in this multipolarity environment, you're going to end up with basically 3, maybe 4 trading networks. There's going to be the China network, there's going to be the American network, and there's going to be the EU network, and the EU will be the smallest of the 3. The other one that might break out is Middle East, MENA, and Africa, which may end up falling under the Chinese sphere. But you're going to end up with, when you're a country and you're in a system, you're stuck in that system. If you're with the American system, you're stuck in the American system. If you're in the Chinese system, you're in the Chinese system. There's not necessarily going to be a lot of crossover. Like, there'll be crossover between America and the EU, but not America and China, not China and the EU, maybe. It'll be basically closed gardens. That they're right about. That is the future of global trade. Rather than just being able to do business wherever, however, with anybody at any time, move capital, all this type of thing, it's going to be closed systems. Which is actually kind of funny, because in my fiction, one of my fantasy novels, that's actually how the world works. Funny. And I wrote that 10 years ago. So, fun times. Anyway, we're getting to the top of the hour. We have some news stories to cover, so let's move on from global trade. This week, this video is not relevant. This week, the Pentagon announced a new press corps of 60 journalists who had agreed to follow a new media policy, and will be welcomed into the building to cover the U.S. military. It says here, from ABC News. Several conservative news outlets said Wednesday that they had agreed to a new press policy rejected by virtually all legacy media organizations and will take their place in the Pentagon to cover Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and the U.S. military. The new Pentagon press corps will include the Gateway Pundit, the National Pulse, Human Events, podcaster Tim Pool, the Just the News website founded by journalist John Solomon, Frontlines by Turning Point USA, and Lindell TV run by MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell. The Pentagon's announcement came less than a week after dozens of reporters from outlets like the New York Times, the Associated Press, CNN, and the Washington Post turned in their access badges rather than agree to a policy that journalists say will restrict them to covering news approved by Hegseth. Hegseth spokesman Sean Parnell announced the next generation of the Pentagon press corps with more than 60 journalists who had agreed to the new policy. He said 26 journalists who had previously been part of the press corps were among the signees. The department wouldn't say who any of them were, but several outlets reposted his message on X saying they had signed on. There isn't even unanimity among organizations that appeal to conservative consumers. Fox News Channel, by far the most popular news source for fans of President Donald Trump, was among the walkouts, as was Newsmax. In a post on X, Parnell denounced the, quote, self-righteous media who chose to self-deport from the Pentagon. Quote, Americans have largely abandoned digesting their news through the lens of activists who masquerade as journalists in the mainstream media, Parnell wrote. Quote, we look forward to beginning a fresh relationship with members of the new Pentagon press corps, unquote. The journalists who left the Pentagon haven't stopped working covering the U.S. military. Many have been reporting aggressively, for example, on stories about strikes against boats in Central America, alleged to be part of the drug trade. By not being in the Pentagon, quote, reporters will have to work harder, there's no question about it, said Barbara Starr, a longtime Pentagon reporter retired from CNN. Quote, but the real price is paid by the American people and the American military families, unquote, Starr said. Military families who've lost their sons and daughters serving. They want to know everything and they want to know it fast, unquote. Starr wondered about Hegseth. Quote, what is he so afraid of, unquote? New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd wrote a biting piece about the defense secretary over the weekend titled Fraidy Cat at the Pentagon. But Hegseth's boss, President Trump, has expressed support for the new media policy, and Hegseth's aggressive moves mirror some of those made by the administration. The president has sued outlets like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal for their coverage of him. And it goes on to wrap up. And Lindell. I didn't even know Mike Lindell had his own media shop. Needs better branding, I would say. But I thought that was an interesting kind of conclusion to the Pentagon press corps story. If you're looking for another sign of authoritarianism, for the consideration of the Midnight Society. So this one is fun. What's this story here? Oops. No, I needed that. Nope, but not that one either. I needed this one. There we go. As kind of a closer, we're not going to get to the Burevestnik nuclear missile, so come listen to me and the guys talk about that on The Living Joke on Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern. And of course, you can watch it anytime on any podcast network. But this one, we'll close with this, and it says here that... the original tweet says, in the year 2000, people didn't wish it were 1980. We have endless reboots and reruns now. As boomer geriatrics cling to power, millennials entering middle age remember their childhoods, and zoomers view the old world preserved in early digital amber. One way of looking at the 2008 financial crisis and its aftermath is we had another Great Depression, but by various monetary and fiscal means we spread it over 3 or 4 times its length. This made it more tolerable, but it also meant whole generations would never escape it. And then add tech monopolies and monopsonies and AI. When you don't rip the Band-Aid, you don't recover. I wrote an article in 2016 called The Long Depression, where I argued that we had been in a Great Depression and it just didn't seem like it because of the way jobs were, the way housing was, how unaffordable everything had become, all the suffering that was going on. And I wrote a follow-up about millennials, specifically called The Long Depression 2. And it's actually in the Millennials collection. It's right here, and I'm going to quote from it because it is surprisingly prescient. The Long Depression Part 2, which I wrote in 2023. Years ago, I wrote an article called The Long Depression, where I argue that instead of a bounce back from the 2008 crisis, we had never really recovered. If you say something like this on Twitter, 20 people will come with charts and personal anecdotes as to why that's not the case. Unemployment's at historic lows, wages have started to grow coming out of the pandemic, and median income is at the highest point in American history. Much of the increase in wages has come at the bottom of the market, which gets into how people actually feel about the economy. As in so many things, data only tells part of the story. The numbers can tell us that things are going along just fine, but why aren't people feeling this new wealth? Even before the pandemic, when the economy was more healthy, in data terms, people were still feeling that the economy just wasn't paying off for the average person. This is the great mystery of our time. It seems like the economy is doing well by the numbers, but when you poll people or read sentiment online, everyone seems to be grousing about the present economy. And then I go into everything why this is, but most importantly, I get into the taxes situation and how we get out. We're left with one question. How do we get out of this long depression? The pathway is not an easy one. It's not every day we can destroy the world's entire industrial capacity and then rebuild it with favorable demographics. Where does that leave us now? Rebuilding domestic industry is certainly a beginning of solving the problem, and that is underway in a big way. Rebuilding supply chains from extraction through the entire value-add chain to final product can employ people and keep money moving through the economy. These are all good things. However, there are structural things that can be changed to improve things for everyday people too. We can get back to building large-scale housing projects to help people at the bottom of the income ladder and open up free market properties for others. This will have an effect of lowering the cost of housing and making it possible for people to buy. We can raise the minimum wage and keep the wage gains above inflation, as they do in Australia and Denmark. Transportation and walkable cities are popular right now, and we can invest in transit projects and provide other options for people other than owning a car. Investments in education will pay long-term dividends as well. The government could also return to setting prices on things like trucking, airline tickets, taxi fares, and other essential items. Agricultural subsidies could stabilize food prices, and increase resources into local food cooperatives could also create a cheaper and more resilient food structure. Repealing the Trump and Bush era tax cuts will help pay for this, as well as raising taxes on those incomes over $400,000 a year. Cutting defense spending as vital, as well as increasing taxes on capital gains and investments. Ultimately, we need to end the 50-year experiment with neoliberal economics and return to a time when we, as a society, make decisions about how our country works. That's a good one. Go look at me. Like, that's... Every once in a while I write something good. Anyway, I just laughed at this tweet, and then we're going to go. I laughed at this because I'm like, yeah, I've been saying this for years. Like, it is one way of looking at it, and very little has changed, and a lot of people got left behind. And if you want to find out about getting left behind, you should go read my new book, America's Lost Generation. It's out now on Amazon, and it's also at my website, CameronJournal.com, which you just saw. So feel free to go take that on. So anyway, it's been a long evening. So let's get out of here. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal News Hour. I almost said podcast, News Hour. And I thank you so much for watching. You can catch me on Twitter, LinkedIn, at Cameron Cowan, on TikTok, at Cameron Journal, on Instagram, at Cameron Cowan. I love you for watching. Thank you so much. Join me on Wednesday with Will and Connor for The Living Joke. We will be talking about the Russian missile thing and a whole bunch of other fun stuff. And the interview for today, Monday, is with Stephanie Hunter-Jones, and it is about your sex life. So if you're 18 plus, it is a restricted episode. If you're 18 plus, go listen to that. And I will see you next time on the Cameron Jewel News Hour next Monday at 7. All right, talk soon. Bye-bye now.